Welcome everybody back to another episode of Maintenance Untangled. As always, crank it up. Join us as we continue to untangle this amazing world of maintenance. Warm welcome back to my co-host Derick. How are we?
Thanks, Ricky. Glad to be back. I am really well. Looking forward to what this new year holds.
Welcome to another episode of Maintenance Untangled, where we untangle the complexities of maintenance.
So, Ricky, what are we going to untangle today?
Well, Derick, obviously, as we continue on this new year, we want to try and make sure we continue bring more value for our listeners. We really want to talk about PM safety, so your preventative maintenance safety checks. And then we obviously want to go more into, obviously, the requests that we had about some CMMS Master Data, and obviously something we're both very familiar with. So, Derick, off to safety. Why are PM safety checks important?
Okay, so typically your preventive maintenance checks, right, are based on equipment type and OEM recommendations. And similarly, safety checks are often either based on OEM recommendations, legal requirements, or what is commonly known as code of practices, which is sort of a best practice guideline normally published by either government organizations or regulatory organizations. Now, if you have a safety required PM check in your CMMS, my advice is always to ensure that it's a real safety PM check. Is it required by law, or is it part of a code of practice? Then these checks should be your must do at any cost type of PMs, right? The harsh reality is that should something go wrong, and these were not done, you and your team could be legally prosecuted. So while the safety PMs are important to keep people safe and environment safe, the other side of it, which is not always talked about and it's not always spoken about, is that not doing your safety PMs could leave you open to legal prosecution. And I think it's really important for people to understand that this, could have an impact on your life and your family life. So really ensure your team understands the importance of it. But I also have to add this, just because a PM is important from an equipment perspective or anything like that, please do not make it a safety PM, because that will then water down the importance of your real safety PMs. And the things that's really legal requirements, and those that really should have been done just get lost in the noise.
So, Derick, we see this a lot, but because a business has had something happen, they've put it down as a safety PM when it actually really isn't. What would you maybe then classify that PM as?
So I think that it then goes into what's my priority rating on the PM as well. If it's safety related, that's fine. It can be safety related, but then make it a different rating. Typically, my advice would always be to have a legal tab or legal code in your PM system, so that you can clearly flag it as this is legal, or it's a code of practice, which is the same. So you can just say it's a legal requirement, we have to do this. So then flag it as that. That would be always my advice, because some of your PMs is safety related, but it's not a legal requirement, and therefore yes, it's there to keep people safe, but I'm thinking about, let's say, doing an inspection on a concrete pathway, where it's prone to cracking. It'll say, well, this is safety PM, just check that there's no tripping hazards and grind the concrete down, as you often see on the pavement next to the road, where an actual gantry walkway, which is a structural steel, that's a legal requirement. So that kind of PM has to be done and has to be flagged as a legal requirement, because you must do structural inspections every year on all of your structures. Depending on your environment, that frequency may be less, but yeah. And that's where it's important to distinguish between, what's safety and what's legal requirements or code of practice requirements, which are the things that if you don't do them could cause you a lot of grief should there be prosecution involved.
Awesome. So from a trade perspective, what's one thing that you've seen in your time that could help indicate that this PM is a legal requirement and must be done?
Look, ultimately, it's all about knowing your legislative requirements, which is not easy because there is a lot of the law is fairly cumbersome, and I think that's where it's a collective. It's not just a tradesperson. That's a collective effort from typically your engineers, managers, everybody that carries a legal responsibility to make sure that the legal, I will say the legal PMs in your system is checked and verified. And look, if you're really not sure, get external consultation. You can always phone the inspector. Say for SA, if you're based in South Australia or whichever relevant authority, and ask them the question, is this a legal requirement, yes or no? Because they're the experts and they can advise you. Don't be scared. Ask the question. Okay, so today we are covering CMMS Master Data. So let's start with CMMS, right? So that's your computerized maintenance management system like SAP and Pronto and those. Ricky, so what is master data and why does it really matter?
Sure thing. So master data is about all the data itself that's actually stored in the system. So that's everything from your equipment through to your assets, through to, work groups, I think they're called in SAP, or responsibility groups. I've heard them called in others. Preventative maintenance tasks are all stored in there, any documentation that's related to it. So master data is basically like the big giant database that actually looks after how you actually do maintenance on site. And why it matters is your master data is the backbone of the CMMS. It helps drive accurate maintenance, planning, scheduling, and reporting.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is, I suppose, when that master data isn't up to date, it isn't checked over, or it's poorly maintained, it leads to a lot of wasted resource hours, unreliable KPIs, and as a business, you really can't make those decisions because the data that you actually have in the system itself isn't telling you the full truth.
So, Ricky, how does master data actually help you with decision making?
It helps you make decisions because it allows you to focus on the right things that actually matter for the business itself. And we spoke about this a couple of times, and it is a reoccurring thing. An example being your breakdown. Something's constantly breaking down, and that's, it's not down to the right asset, or the right asset information isn't actually punched in there. Then you don't really understand it. Same being like your plan or your trades. When they go in to plan your breakdowns or plan your routine maintenance, your bill of materials is up to date. They can easily, quickly, and effectively get the right motor, get the right bush that needs to be replaced. So it really helps with decision making to be able to go through and speed that up.
Very good.
The next piece around that is obviously making sure that you've also got a governance and standards around how master data is put into the system, how it's managed, who the accountable group is. Now, it's not everybody on site has access. Now, some situations that does actually need to be happened, but it needs to be ownership of the data. There needs to be a group of people who own that. Now, each site is different. Now, it could be, for example, reliability engineers may own the PM, the preventative maintenance frequency, tasks, cycles, and those kind of things, whereas your planners would be more responsible maybe for updating bill of materials or those kind of things. So really having that clear ownership of who looks after what. Standard naming conventions, functional locations. It is absolutely critical that the naming conventions are very consistent. The coding structures are the same, and obviously any kind of validation rules are a part of that piece, because that then plays into something that I'll discuss a little bit later in terms of how you set up your analytical reporting, be it in Excel, Power BI, to be able to then understand, is your governance being maintained? And any
So,
documents?
Ricky, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. And any documents as well. There is a version history point. So that way you know who's jumped in, who's updated it, and what information has been changed.
So, I think standard naming conventions is critical, and it's important to keep it simple and clear. I've worked in places where the codes they used had no logic behind it. I started my career in a company, and they used a system, and I cannot remember the naming convention system they used, but like the electric arc furnace was a OKJ05, so there was no logic behind it, and it makes it, and you had to study it to understand it, so you had to study the codes for a motor or a gearbox, and it wasn't just a motor, it's an MTR and a gearbox, a GBX. It was very complicated. So, and it made it really hard for the people on the floor to raise to work requests to the right level, and so they just picked the highest level that they knew was sort of in the right vicinity, and just picked that one because that's the only ones they knew. And it was hard. It made everything else hard. So, and I got stuck.
That's right. So your functional locations, Derick, I know it's something obviously that we've spoken about before. Now, some people will group them together in sections, but they should actually be grouped about their geographical location over grouping crane 1, crane 2, crane 3 together, correct?
Yeah, so I think it's both. So it's geographic, but it's also functional. So in a more recent case, we had sorry, go again.
All right.
Yes, I think it's important to. So it's both about geographic, but it's also about function, right? So, and I'll explain it like this. So if you have 5 773 mining trucks, you will group each mining truck by itself. Each truck is a unique asset, and then under that asset you have a chassis and a bin and a engine and wheels and diffs and blah blah, and each one will have the same structure. What you won't do is you won't go and say, well, we'll group all the bins together and we'll group all the cabs together and we'll group all the chassis together, because that doesn't make sense. Now, you're laughing, but I've had this happen where conveyors was grouped like that. So they grouped all the head chutes together, all the actual conveyors together, all the tail chutes together, all the take-up pulleys together, which does not make logically sense, because a conveyor consists of a take-up, a head, and tail chute, and so that's why it needs to be the functional grouping, and not just asset or asset type grouping. That makes sense.
100%. And it also makes it easier for the guys on the floor as well, because they can go, I'm at this conveyor, and then this is the motor, and then this is the bush.
100%. All right, so Ricky, what's your third point?
Is making sure there's processes in for that data to be entered into the system is key. So if there is a change that needs to be done, there's, I think it's SAP, a master data notification, as an example, whereabouts something is entered in the system, then those ownership group picks it up, and then they enter it in and close it out, because then it also creates the record keeping, but it also then indicates that there is some kind of task. But also those users are also trained on best practices. And again, this falls into the reporting a little bit later. Notifications whereabouts of those things have not been entered in incorrectly.
I think so. Any system work on garbage in, garbage out, right? And first point of entry is really important to make sure that you put it to the right spot and the right location in terms of hierarchy where it's raised. Also, to your point, I know in SAP they use master data, so I've recently helped one of the clients to say, well, there is no such thing in the system they were using, and all we did is we just create a new user group called master data, and then so same functional location, but then your work request just gets raised to that resource group of master data, which then is owned by the reliability engineers, and they look at those requests coming in to make changes into their master data. That way you also capture it at that equipment level, and when you're making changes to your PMs or to your function location or add to your BOM or remove something off your BOM. So there's always ways around it. If your system doesn't allow you, my advice is always to try and keep it in your system. Don't go and create Excel sheets outside.
And which obviously flows into the fourth point about obviously that auditing those changes by having, like the way you said, you get that change log about what's been in there, and so forth, which also is really important. So that way who's made the change. If someone's made a mistake, then obviously they can have that coaching about the mistakes that they physically made, because nobody loves pineapples.
So, Ricky, what can you do if your system do not allow role-based permissions?
Have very clear guidelines about who's responsible for what, being very, very clear, being very upfront, and empowering those people to take that responsibility is really the key bit. Again, it goes back to a discussion that we've had several times about, people is the most important thing. If people don't feel empowered, they won't feel like they have, the energy to go through and do it. So.
And obviously making sure they get the right level of training for that as well.
100%. There's plenty of tools out there. One tool I can certainly recommend is a tool called Scribe that basically captures what you click on screen. So if you've got the ability to do that, you can basically create those kind of things. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think most of us learn a lot easier with visual tools than reading through a 110-page document.
Where's the fun in that, Derick?
All right. Okay. So then we've made changes to our master data. What's next?
Another key thing as well is obviously analyzing that data, the data that's actually in the system itself.
Most the point.
I'll come back to that.
Okay.
Because you're talking about flow, and I'm like, oi, and I'm like, hang on.
Yeah, but no, so that's why I thought the feedback loop is a good flow into that.
All right, I'll do feedback loop. Cool.
Because if we've just made changes, and it's about making sure you give that feedback to the crew.
True.
Okay, I'll go again. All right. Okay. So now we've made the changes in our master data. We've updated the PM. What's important after that?
It's about feedback. So we think about the PDCA cycle, plan, do, check, act. So the next piece is about obviously making sure the cycle flows around again. And that's passing feedback onto the trades, the engineers, anyone involved with the job itself, supervisors, superintendents, that there have been changes to the job and that they're aware of it. But then it's also then once they've done it, that they pass feedback back to you. And creating that feedback loop is really important to make sure that everything itself is driving forward, driving in the right direction. If something that has been listed as a job step is not important or there's not enough detail, then that needs to be captured and put into the document or within the text information within the work order. And obviously, again, that falls back into making sure your master data is up to date, and also following from previous discussions about making sure that we're passing on experience and knowledge, not just onto a select few trades, but the trades as a whole.
100%. Then, Ricky, that's very important, right? It's about giving people feedback, and ensuring that if people gives feedback on, say, a PM and what's captured in it, is to actually act on it, make sure that you capture that and then provide that feedback again. And in my experience, the fastest way to disengage, so you were talking about empowering people earlier, the opposite of that is disengaging people. And I think the fastest way to disengage people is ask them for feedback on a PM, and then when they give it to you, you do nothing about that. That's a sure way to lose interest.
Reminds me of a steelworks in a certain town where there was a lot of talking from a certain manager that unfortunately didn't fluctuate into anything for the town. But we won't go into politics.
Yes. All right. So, Ricky, we've got data. What do we do with it?
It's always important to make sure that you've got a way that you can analyze and monitor your data quality. I can't stress that enough, because your data, again, is what drives businesses these days. So if we talk about using Power BI report dashboards, I've had experience with this whereabouts, we've helped a client, we've put all their data into Power BI report, and until they started analyzing it, they didn't really understand how challenging they'd accidentally set up their master data. Making sure that all that data is completeness and error. It allows them also to build error trends and makes everything easier to use. So if your data's set up right at the beginning and it's analyzed and it's consistent and all that kind of thing, the reporting becomes a breeze.
Okay, Ricky, but so I'm a new maintenance manager at a plant, right? And I know that we're only capturing 30% of our actual work is captured in our CMMS, which happens nowhere else but on this place I've just started. And there's no work being, or there's a large portion of our work's being done outside of CMMS. What's the use in setting up dashboards if I'm not even, if I know my data is inaccurate?
Derick, you can't manage what you can't measure. So example being, if you're not putting in work requests, you're not going to see that show up in your maintenance KPIs. You're not going to understand, are those work requests being approved? What is the high priority work? Is the maintenance being done effectively? Whereabouts is all those breakdowns actually occurring? Or whereabouts do we need to focus on the shutdown that we potentially don't have to do based on last week? So by being able to make sure that that information is in the system, you're able to measure it and then able to see a big, clearer picture. Because if you're not having a system that's helping to maintain that information, you might miss stuff.
Agreed, again, and I think so visualization is probably the easiest way to show that, and it's important that you start somewhere. I think it's always really important. At least start measuring it, and then which way am I heading? Otherwise, you're running blind, and I think that's important.
100%. And as part of that as well, moving through is obviously then you're talking about your life cycle, so your master data. So making sure assets, when they are retired, they're taken out of service, they're archived. At least that way you know what is an active asset and what is an inactive asset. And integration between different systems. So if you have 3 or 4 different systems, like you may have a SCADA, you may have SAP, and you may have another tool or anything along those lines, God forbid you'd have hundreds, making sure that the integration between them is actually clear and working. And that's done through your IT systems.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point, Ricky. As we often, we only look at the beginning, and often you don't close it out properly, and the retirement of the asset doesn't always happen. And capturing that history of why we're retiring the asset, what's the end state of the asset when retired. It doesn't always get captured properly. I've helped a business where they retired things like a front-end loader, but that history isn't captured, and then 6 months later they want to bring it out of retirement, but they have no idea, does it need a half-life, full life, what's the state of the asset at point of retirement. And I think that's really important to close that off and make sure you capture it correctly.
Spot on. And that obviously then flows into the asset management and financial reporting. CFOs, they want to make sure they have a clear understanding about, what is, especially trying to balance the 3 business statement sheets. They're very clear on that. And it's also then obviously by having that data in place as well allows you to make repair or replace decisions, and allows the financial team to do depreciation and valuation on the site as well. Making sure that everything is linked so that way you get that true cost. Is it the particular motor on that conveyor, Derick, that's causing the issues or is it the conveyor itself as a whole as an asset? It gives you clearer understanding when it comes to how much money do I need to spend next year on maintenance to not only just make this site operate as is, but potentially also maybe to do some improvements, replace the dump truck or buy 5 or 6 more loaders. Dump trucks, to help, that kind of thing. And massively helps reduce and manage compliance and regulatory audits as well. really helps support those things, which are massive in businesses. Usually, most businesses, once they've had an audit, have 30 or 40 or 50 items. If you've got a lot of that stuff already done, then the CMMS, that list can be significantly reduced, which means less load on already, people who are restricted on time.
Again, and I think that's also why it's important to set up your asset list correctly, from the beginning. Otherwise, you can't do that analysis and understanding, what's my asset cost versus specific component cost, and to review that maintenance versus replacement cost, because often we keep on replacing something, but we could have upgraded it to something new at a higher cost initially, but over life cycle it would have been cheaper. And if you don't capture that granular level, that's where you lose that ability.
Spot on. And it all comes back to, it gives you that holistic strategic insight about what's going on with the business. We've spoken about a number of points already, but at the end of the day, the idea to run a business is, how do we strategically grow our business to make more money? How do we be more effective at our role? Make sure the people are engaged. Life is good. It's, as I said before, bloody sweet. So it really helps everything as a whole. And it also allows you to benchmark your business against, a mine site down the road. Are you guys performing better or not? Over a pint or a schnitty at the pub. So,
and again, so if you have a governance document, how you set up that master data, it's a lot easier then to compare across multiple assets or multiple sites to compare how is this performing, a mill performing on this site versus a mill performing on this site. And again, it makes it a lot easier. Otherwise, you end up comparing apples and pears because you're not actually measuring the same thing.
Correct.
So, Ricky, what can business do to order to maintain data?
So I think there's a couple of points in here, Derick. I think one of the key steps is complete an annual review of your master data. Make sure that, those owners are allocated time, if they're a particular planner, or, have someone on site, maybe potentially go through, or get a contractor in to go through and do a good solid audit of the master data and outline high priority fixes, medium fixes, low priority fixes, and start to get that ball rolling about making sure that your master data is all up to date, all records are correct. So that way it's all done. Again, do quarterly, monthly, have those automated reports in and just check them. What are the key things? Because that'll save you time when it comes to doing an annual review. But obviously the first point is do the annual review, and if that's kicking off, things are swinging, start making sure quarterly or monthly that those things are being done. We spoke about it, making sure there are stewards within the data itself that are responsible to make sure that your master data is correct. They are responsible for putting it in. There's a document. They've been trained. They know how to do it. Making sure that all feedback is reviewed and implemented. Like you said before, we don't want feedback to sit there and do nothing.
Yep.
Benchmarking the business itself against the industry standards. How are we performing against other sites that are in the same industry as we are? And then go through and make sure that, every year that you document your audits, the results, and then again, continuous improvement. It's all about that cycle. And that way things would be swinging and happy days from there.
Very good. Ricky, thanks for today's discussion. I think some really valid points. And look, I think it's important to, as you said, is to keep on reviewing and improving. So thanks for that. Your insight around master data always fascinates me. I enjoy our discussions, and thanks for your time, Ricky, today. We thank our listeners that's been patiently listening to us. All up to you.
Thanks, Derick.
About that.
Blipper. Nah.
But I'll try again. Thanks, Ricky. Thanks for your insight, and it's always good to listen to you. Talking about master data, I know you're very passionate about it, and look, I hope everybody got something out of today's discussion. And any more questions, please send us a question. Happy to. I'm sure Ricky will answer all of your questions as much as you want to send him.
Sounds good. I love enjoying answering those questions, and don't be afraid to sing out. But thank you everyone for listening. Your support is, really grateful for it. So, Derick, what are we untangling next week?
Right. Okay. So next week we're talking about hazard communication. So how do we actually communicate hazards and discuss it and make sure that we transfer that knowledge. And we were talking about my favorite maintenance strategy, run to failure, which is always opens up a can of worms, but we'll untangle it next week and really unpack it, and so see if I can convince more people that run to failure is a sound maintenance strategy. If you enjoyed this conversation, please make sure to like, subscribe, share with a colleague, and join us next time for some more practical tips and some deep dives. We've got a lot of amazing topics coming up this year, so stick with us. Please share and let us know if you want anything else that specifically you want us to talk about. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and keep untangling maintenance. The low battery is about to die soon. It keeps on popping up saying low battery, low battery.
So, Derick, it actually comes back to you can't. Was it? Oh, fuck. You can't measure.
You don't manage what you don't measure.
You can't manage what you can't measure. Fuck me. All right. So,
They
Derick,
can't manage what you don't measure.
Manage.
Don't. Yeah.
All right. Derick, you can't measure. You can't manage. Shit.
Sorry. Write it down.
I think I've got it. Your face just started laughing, and I'm like,
Sorry. Okay.